welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at the very important economic situation of the country. Of course, a cause of much concern for the most part of this year. And we have seen that due to a lot of political uncertainty, of course, and the kind of economic challenges that Pakistan has faced, this has been a cause of much concern and worry for all of us. And we have been, of course, throughout the year, been hearing talks of a default. There have been parallels drawn with Sri Lanka earlier as well. Something, of course, which has been denied time and again by the Finance Ministry, by the Prime Minister and other political leaders of the country. Something that was reiterated by the Finance Minister even today, saying that Pakistan is not going to default and that he can prove that to anyone who argues otherwise. There was also, of course, statements coming in from the Prime Minister who emphasized on the kind of economic challenges that the country faces, including, of course, the price hike, the IMF program that he says is the only option for Pakistan to continue and go ahead with, and that unfortunately this is the reality that we'll have to live with, and because of that there will be very tough and serious decisions taken by the government, something of course that has been done in the past by them as well. The Prime Minister has also talked about the energy sector. He has also earlier established a committee to focus on the issue of circular debt in the energy sector, and has also now emphasized on moving towards solarization of the public buildings of federal institutions in the capital, and this is something that he has directed to be completed by April next year, which is of course a very ambitious target. And so we're going to be taking a look at how exactly that is going to happen and what sort of input is going to be there with regards to such decisions, and then of course how provinces will follow suit. The of course remaining fiscal year is coming up with its own challenges. We still haven't had the 9th review with the IMF, that's still pending, and we of course have heard from the resident of the IMF, the resident representative in Pakistan, that the talks have been productive so far, but of course it remains to be seen what comes out of that. And then of course some sort of political uncertainty is still coming in within the next year as well, with of course the issue of elections also coming in soon. So what is going to be the impact of all of these factors, especially of course also global concerns and the rising issue of terrorism within Pakistan that is also contributing to the current economic challenges. So that is going to be the focus of our discussion today, and we'll try and take a look at where we stand today and how we're going to move ahead towards economic prosperity in the next year. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Batafi, and we've been joined in the studios today by senior research economist, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, Dr. Mahmood Khalid, also in the studios. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for joining us and being a part of the debate. We've also been joined by our guests online. We've been joined by President Re-Energia, Mr. Amir Zafar Durrani, and we've been joined by Dr. Khakan Najeeb, former advisor, Ministry of Finance. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the show today. Let me start with you, Dr. Mahmood Saab, considering, of course, that there have been numerous talks with regards to where we stand today, numerous discussions as to the challenges that exist. And of course, we all agree that this is a difficult time with regards to economic conditions, but there have been many issues with regards to speculations, with regard to the talks of a default, something, of course, that has been reiterated by the Finance Minister once again today as well, that we're not going to be proceeding towards. But yet again, the kind of speculations that have existed and continue to exist now have impacted the economic situation. So let's just take a look again at where we stand today. Even if we take out the issue of default at the moment, the kind of challenges that Pakistan faces today, where do you think we are at the moment?
Well, to be honest, the situation is a crisis situation, but certainly not to that extent that where we really believe that the country as a whole or a sovereign entity is going to crumble down like a firm, where in case of any non-payments there is going to be liquidation and others. But what we have to understand is that in case of any country's sustainability towards making payments to the rest of the world or running its own business, for example the government, they have to have that kind of a flow with them, and that is something which we have to think about. For the time being, we are in a serious situation where we are unable to meet our current account deficits because our imports are too high as compared to what we are selling to the rest of the world. But that can be managed, as in today's talk by the Finance Minister, he has talked about the import restraints, and I think that's the best strategy to avoid any crisis in the short term, where you're trying to manage what we need as the most essential item, and we can postpone certain things for the better times. But having said that, we really have to understand that this crisis is not just for the time being, and that has some root causes over the structural problems which lies below the surface. So we have to move towards that as a solution as well. So for the time being, we might live like that, and that's a situation which everybody has to understand and try to participate and play its role whatever it can. But in the long run, we have to understand the issues and try to focus in terms of improving that.
All right. Dr. Khaqan, considering, of course, that the IMF program is something of utmost importance at the moment, and also, of course, the Prime Minister's statement reiterates that fact, we still, unfortunately, haven't completed the ninth review, and there's, of course, been challenges that have been there in the past as well. But if we have this as a priority, if we're clear that the IMF program is what is the only option for us moving ahead, what do you think are the major points of contention at the moment with the IMF, and why is it that we are experiencing such delays?
IMF is Pakistan's only option. It's an only option for any country which is in a difficult balance of payments situation, which means an external sector challenge, has $6 billion of borrowed reserves, has remittances which are slowing, has exports which are slowing, and is trying to keep its imports sustainable at $5.5 billion. Given this situation, your access to friendly countries is very limited, as they have even asked you to come to the IMF and then go to them. There is a global slowdown after a commodity price hike. IMF is your only bet. IMF is your only anchor. Any delay in IMF causes jitteriness in the markets, which you have seen in the foreign exchange market, which you have seen in our bond market, and you have seen in our credit default swap market. Having said that, the problem is that everyone thinks that the IMF has some conditionalities, and then the IMF conditionalities are very tough. Sana, both these statements need, to be thought about. First of all, IMF conditionalities are simply what OGRA and NEPRA tells you to do in terms of cost recovery. Barring our long-term efficiency issues, barring our long-term structural issues, what OGRA and NEPRA tell you, barring that, you are in a market-based exchange rate, which you have agreed with the fund, and a good reform that you did a couple of years ago. So managing it at that level. Inflation is a supply side phenomenon, but it's also a monetary phenomenon. So having a monetary policy which is fairly tight. So now where do we stand with the IMF? I think where we stand with the IMF is that we are trying, and here I give the government a little bit of leeway. The reason I always give government the leeway here is that the floods have really disturbed the picture we set with IMF on the 29th of August when the board approval came. This is really, really important. I mean, we can easily, say our policy making is very weak and all those things, but that alone changed the FY23 numbers so drastically that everyone has to go back to the drawing board. So you had to figure out what your flood challenge was. You had to figure out what your macro numbers would look like. So the macro and the fiscal framework has taken time. Fair enough. I hope that they have that number. They have the flood number. It has been consulted with the multilaterals. So let's hope that they can figure that out. I think that's the first thing that we have to agree with them.
Khaqan Sahab, can you also add to that if the finance ministry is also currently aligned with the fact that the IMF is the only way forward? Because of course earlier the kind of statements that were coming in from Ishaq Dar Sahab, it of course raised questions as to whether or not the same priority is being given from the finance ministry.
Sana, I think that's a very important question. I would take the Prime Minister's statement on face value. When the Prime Minister of Pakistan, in a meeting where all his team, the economic team, the petroleum team, the energy team was sitting, and he said, IMF is the only option to go by. I would take that to be a feeding that is coming through the ministries. It's a feeding coming through the energy people, and of course, mainly the finance ministry. When faced with the second problem after flood, Sana, here is that the timing of the IMF is very difficult. Usually, countries do IMF programs in the very first half of their political cycle, and then the second half is left with them. Right now, there is an election cycle which is looking right ahead of us, and the country is trying to do a fund program where the adjustments, the pricing adjustments mainly, have to be made. But these are the easier adjustments. I think they have realized that KSA money, UAE money can complement but can't form the basis of Pakistan moving forward. IMF and the multilaterals will form the basis of us moving forward in the 6 months to carve us out of the balance of payments difficulty. It would be supplemented or complemented with the monies that we get, or the Russian oil that we get, or the UAE deposit that we get, or the oil on deferred payment that we get. Here, make the pricing changes, keep the monetary policy where it is, or a bit tighter. I'm hoping that CPI would drop a little bit with stability in the petroleum prices. Go ahead, make the macro and the fiscal framework. These are much less challenging times than you would see if there were to be shortages in the country. The best example that I give, you've had a slight wheat shortage in the country. Look at the flour price in the country. Uh, if there were to be shortages further, it would aggravate the situation. So when people say that these conditions are tough, I think these are just pricing changes. The tough conditions
Okay.
are if we were asked something, much bigger, and we can talk about that.
All right. Amir Zafar Sahab, considering, of course, that the circular debt in the energy sector is something that is cited as one of our major concerns at the moment as well, there have been two important decisions that the Prime Minister has taken. A committee has been formed, of course, to take up this task. And there's also the decision that he has announced today in terms of solarization of public buildings in the federal capital by April 2023. I want you to evaluate how realistic these decisions are in terms of achieving them, especially the solarization project in just a few months, and the kind of resources that would require, and also the formation of certain committees, because at the end of the day, of course, we have certain infrastructures and setups already in place. Why is there a need for more committees on certain issues, and whether or not it's going to help?
Thank you very much, Sana. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I can.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you always take this posit that re-energy is about energy, re-energy is about energizing human lives. So
Yeah, I
let
was
me
hoping
allow
that
me
you are
to.
going to say that.
Yeah,
I was hoping
Farooq,
you are going
you're
to say
spot
that.
on.
Go ahead.
Spot on, my dear friend. Okay, so let me continue from Hakan. I think he's been bold enough to lay out what is plausible. And I support him in the fact that we have cornered ourselves, or actually put ourselves in a corner that we have no choice but to go beyond the fund at the present moment. So I have said, but he also alluded to something which I want to say bluntly. So right now, it's not just the floods, not just the power sector debt, but actually it's the whole fiscal scenario of Pakistan. We have a very large government that continues growing. We have a bunch of provinces that have to be suckled through the NFC. They hardly raise any taxes on their own. Then we have the pension debt. I mean, it is just really rising like crazy. And on top of that, very soon you'll see a new thing on the power debt, which is the SUI gas, or the gas. I say SUI so that the Pakistani viewer understands that, we're really talking about gas, whether you get it from, through LNG, LPG, whatever. And the third thing, which I think is the most important, is the political instability in the country. The balancing act that the PDM politics versus the statements of, and very well-intentioned statements of the Prime Minister, which Hakan alluded to, it's kind of a marching order, right, to everybody. By face value, and I think in beyond face value, somebody has to take this with some depth at the legislature. So I believe that the politics is actually what is shaking the confidence of both the fund, right? And secondly, our friendly bilaterals. Because the friendly bilaterals at least used to come, and let me give you an example of oil, right? Deferred oil payments used to go up very high in the old days with Saudis, with the Gulf states, not happening at all. So they're all giving the excuse of the fund, which is in a way good. They're helping us reform ourselves. Now back to the solutions that you say on the power sector debt. I think this government is ill-advised by whoever advises it. because, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. All steps like solarization are basically taken for spending more. Now, tell me honestly, do we manufacture any part of what they're going to do on a time when the forex is short? This is probably the worst decision, and whoever advised them should probably be hung in a square because the government is being ill advised. So I think this is of prime importance. Secondly, on the commissions, with the Minister Khurram Dastagir Saab, there was a launch yesterday at the Planning Commission of the Energy Book. And this energy book by PIDE, and you have a worthy member of PIDE sitting there in your studio, and I would really like them to make you understand that it is these very committees and commissions that are really becoming the downfall of a political government, because it is their job to advise the government properly. So I stopped there because I already saw Hakan raise an eyebrow on my hang in the square thing. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Right, and I'll come back to you with more non-energy questions. But Farooq, considering, of course, when we take a look at the situation at the moment, there's also another important decision that has recently come out from the State Bank, which is easing restrictions on certain import items. And of course, previously we've made this as part of a series of tough measures taken for the current economic challenges. Are we in a position right now to ease those restrictions and understand the necessity of those? But how is that going to impact on the overall economy?
Right, and that is a fascinating question, Sana, but you will allow me to actually respond to not only the participants, whatever they have said earlier, but also the way our media keeps on reporting on economy. It is important because, and by the way, because there are so many technocrats sitting in today's program, I reserve the right, my right, to be a journalist with a G, right? That means that I can, resort to colloquialism, and that means that I can use a lot of, popular references. It actually, the way media actually reports our economy or reports on our economy is, reminds me of, one big author in Urdu, Mushtaq Yusfi, who said that in Urdu fiction, the reference to any businessman only comes when you want him to be looted by some looter, right? And that too in a way that the sympathy remains with the looter, not with the looted. So at this moment, the way media keeps on reporting on, business and economy, that seems that they just want to scandalize it. They don't want to focus on nitty-gritty or understand how this works. I'm glad that we have the technocrats in the panel, and they are going to shed more light. But so far, the approach of the government at this moment is because it seems that somehow, while the government keeps on saying that it is going to stay in power for 8 more months, it can't seem to actually convince itself, because that is the most important thing right now. A player who in cricket who opens and the one who comes at the tail end, they both are batsmen, right? They both have a bat and they can play. The only thing is, because there is lack of cover, the last one usually is risk covers. But at this moment, what is happening is, eating all the onions and also being thrashed. Whenever you think that IMF conditions have been met and it has caused all the pain it had to, we actually realize that we still have to go on and do more, and yet somehow it seems that we are reluctant. So right now the government of Pakistan, first of all, will have to actually convince itself that it is here. It is supposed to deliver on the promises to the IMF and then to the common man as well. Fake it till you make it. If that doesn't happen, Sana, for example, today Finance Minister was talking about economy, and once again he used the dreaded D word. If the Finance Minister keeps on talking about default, 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 am I not going to report on that? Am I not going to actually magnify that? Just imagine a word cloud, and if you keep on repeating the word, it is going to get magnified. I liked what Dr. Mahmood was saying, and it was particularly about root causes. We don't ask ourselves critical questions. Our media doesn't, because media doesn't seem to cover economy, it does only cover scandals. If had it done it, it could have actually introspected 50 channels. No one has any coverage of business, economy, or trade or commerce. Why so? At this moment, it seems it is clear that we are spending more, we are earning less. And regarding your question, I think that there are imports which are necessary to contribute to production as well manufacturing, because without that you cannot export. So eventually you'll have to find a balance, but that is also a sticking point with IMF. And of course, IMF also seems to be reluctant somehow. I don't know, for 20 years I have written that we should be trusting IMF implicitly. But this kind of behavior where they become so inflexible is beyond my comprehension.
Right. Dr. Mahmood, considering, of course, that there are important stakeholders involved in the discussion with regards to economy, and we kept on hearing about the need for a charter of economy, especially since Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif took office. But unfortunately, due to many factors, that hasn't happened. And of course, political instability is one, and the lack of political consensus. But when we take a look at the situation, it seems that we're nowhere near achieving any sort of political consensus than we were in the past, and we keep on emphasizing the fundamental need of political stability and consensus. However, there doesn't seem to be much movement towards it. What sort of a role do you think that the important aspects of the society or economists who are looking at certain conditions is in terms of contributing towards such a discussion or discourse, and then forming that as part of what policy is needed or what sort of action is needed? How long are we going to go ahead and look for something which hasn't happened in the past, and if it's not something that is what we're looking at coming in the recent future, can we really rely on that as the only way forward?
And Dr. Saab, because you wear many hats, one of them is of a thinker also by virtue of being part of PIDE. Let me also ask you, why is it that in our discourse one word is not appearing, and that is divest or privatize? Because there are so many SOEs, you could have actually offloaded a lot of burden if you had privatized.
Well, let me start from your question first.
Yeah.
Easier said than done. Everybody knows that the state-owned enterprises are one of the bleeding factors in our overall resource side. But the thing is that we cannot simply go into the market and sell them like commodities. It has to be designed in a way that whatever we are trying to sell is sold in a good price, and it is also helping in terms of some kind of a better market towards it. The problem with our overall doing business of the government is that often the government does not realize that too much footprint in the overall economy is actually choking the other businesses which could have done better than them. Let me just give you an example. Just few days back, I was looking into the Auditor General's report, and it states that in, I think, Punjab, the average cost per student is around 30,000 rupees per student. Irrespective of the grades, that can be further worked out. But just imagine that government providing student education at a cost of 30,000 rupees per month, excluding the cost in terms of the land occupied and other things. And the private sector could have done the job better. So in the government side, we really need to develop a capacity of how they can actually do the same business, but with a different approach.
So letting go, right?
Not just letting go, even taking the control, but thinking about other innovative means of doing things. And the world has actually done it. We have also good examples within Pakistan, which only we have to think about, that these are something which in the long run are both politically right and as well as good for our fiscal side. Now, coming to the first question in terms of the Charter of the Economy, to us, actually, it's not a political issue. Everybody knows that what are the concerns of the overall economy. The difference is only that how you are approaching them. And we are very clear that the approach should also be a unanimous approach, irrespective of the political party. Like Amir Saab just mentioned that we had a Energy Commission report yesterday, and that basically brings out the problems which, if can be improved over the long run, can actually solve our crisis, because of which the IMF type prescriptions are made to us, where really they are not sensitive in terms of how actually the political economy and individuals think about it. They are going to prescribe you something at the end of the day which can bring them results. So we have to really think deep in terms of the problems, and we have to find out the solutions which are apolitical and are the right ways to move forward. But who is going to bell the cat? That's the issue. And as Farooq Sahab earlier mentioned, that unfortunately our discourses, wherever it is happening, is not that much focused in terms of the actual issues, and rather it is basically merely words or something which is just to pass on the bucks rather than putting an end to the problems of ourselves. And at PIDE, we have been working on such issues, but unfortunately, we're not given that much time, as Amir Sahab have just mentioned. We had a commission on growth. We have also done a very good critique of what the IMF prescribed in their last review, and that was actually very well acknowledged. But unfortunately, the debate doesn't move from that part onwards, and that is something which we have to really think
Yeah,
about.
perhaps it will change if we actually graduate from writing papers to creating animated, presentations through which perhaps people
Yes.
can garner.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Mahmood, do you think that your input is not given weightage by the political setup?
I'll give you just a quick example. We all know around this table and generally as well that our public sector development program always shrinks whenever such an IMF conditionality or any resource crunch happens. Now, we have done a very good report, not today, it was done about 1.5 years ago, where we prescribed that how you can insulate certain projects from such types of fiscal crunches and defaults. And we have also mentioned mechanisms through which we can improve the way we are doing the spending in a better manner. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, that doesn't boils down to the policy level. And the reason is that often the ministries claim that this is the political issue where they cannot resist any pressure. But we believe that if institutions can be improved, they can also facilitate the political dialogues and acceptability. Because at the end of the day, any political government would like to be re-elected with a good face that they have not put the country at risk in terms of any fiscal or financial disaster, and yet they have delivered. And there are ways of improving it, but the only thing is that we have to create a dialogue and debate and move towards that solution which is acceptable.
All right. Dr. Hakan, there are also other numerous projects that have been carried out recently. We've also seen the foundation laying of certain development projects in DI Khan and other areas, and of course they are being given a due priority by the current government. But again, considering the kind of economic challenges that we face, it seems that we of course perhaps need to understand exactly whether or not we can afford this or are at the right time right now to move ahead with certain projects. Is this something that you think is in line with where we stand today, especially with regards to the IMF program and to our resources at the moment? Are these projects something that we can go ahead with at this moment, and how much do you think that is going to impact the way that we need to bring about the socio-economic uplift in the provinces especially? Of course, that is one of the priorities of the government, but right now, considering the economic challenges that we have and the resources that we have, is this something that you think is being done right?
So, Sana, the next 6 months are not going to be easy by any stretch of imagination. The global economy is going to slow down. It's going to hit your exports. We are trying to manage the Pakistan economy in a very similar manner as the central banks are doing abroad, which is that we are trying to slow down the economy. We are trying to slow down the current account. We are trying to manage our imports. So the room for maneuverability on the taxes side will also be limited. And that is why we are having this issue with the fund also, where the fund thinks that the target of, for example, 7,400 billion on the FBR and 850 billion on the PDL, the Petroleum Development Levy. Now, most of the people have gotten used to this term, is looking difficult. So if that looks difficult, there are two ways to manage. One, we tax more, which is also difficult given the kind of slowdown that we are doing. But we will have to do a bit more taxation. And there are many areas in Pakistan which remain highly undertaxed. So let's hope, some of those areas would be challenged. And I see that in the next couple of days or weeks with the fund, we'll come up with 300-400 billion of taxes so that we can move on with the IMF.
Dr. Zab, could you qualify that? Could you qualify that which sectors are not taxed enough?
I mean, in Pakistan, if you really have to get your taxes right, the retail is undertaxed, the agriculture sector is undertaxed, the wealth transfer, intergenerational transfer is not taxed. The real estate is free after 5 years. Uh, if you go after these areas, Pakistan will be flying without any external help. And I am very confident on that. So let me reiterate for the people. The agriculture sector is undertaxed. The real estate is free after 5 years. The retail sector is almost non-directly taxed. The intergenerational transfer, when my father, God give him a long life,
Yeah.
but if he was to pass away, and transfer everything to me, it will come without any charge. There is no death tax in the country. There is no wealth tax in the country.
Yeah.
So these are clear areas, and then of course proper property taxation by the cities to develop. Pakistan, I've always had a positive view, because when we start doing these things, we will move in the direction where fund would be, I know we've done 22 programs. I've been involved in the last one as well as in this one. Would be something we'd never be talking about with Hafiz Saab and Sana and Amir. We would be talking about, how to get the real estate taxation right, or how to get the agri taxation right, or how to have intergenerational transfer. But in the meantime, so let's get this 300-400 billion, a bit of cut on the PSDP, a bit of cut on the expenditure, which I haven't seen coming, which I'm not happy about. The current expenditure should have been cut. There is another risk here, Patafi Saab, which we haven't talked about, which is that your 4,000 billion rupees of interest payment is going to cross that level this year, because the monetary tightening has happened. So it's a very difficult ship, but let's hope we can ride it in the way we've talked about. But as you get to end of FY23, there should be a plan of, for example, on the taxation side, what I've said to you, what Amir and Dr. Saab in your studio have said rightly. Another sector we haven't touched. I'm not an expert, but I know that the yields Pakistan has on the agriculture productivity are between one-third to about half of what the world does. So if you want to kill inflation in this country, if you want to have monies transferred to rural areas, agri productivity has to be center stage, as we taxation
Right,
we've talked,
Right,
energy
and
we've
Dr.
talked,
Khaqan Sahab,
and
you can complete the thought, but I want to understand, because it seems that these are very obvious measures that could be taken by the way that you're talking about them. But when we take a look at where we stand today, it seems that there is a lot of emphasis on the fact that we're utilizing all our options, that we need to take tough measures. This is the situation that we are in right now. If these are very textbook measures, why haven't they been taken so far?
Susanna, I've always said that there are two issues why we are unable to do that. I mean, everyone talks about implementation. I think implementation is a factor of coordination and competence. Both these things, unfortunately, at the federal and the provincial level, have slacked down, and we've let our work go to other outsourcing, whether that's to the multilaterals and others, and not to our universities, or not to within the planning commission, for example. So this is really important to understand. These programmed loans, these project loans are for a very short span. That's why you've become a short span country. 1 year project program loan, do 5 things. So we've programmed ourselves to do that. We've never gone in and said that agriculture productivity needs Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, National Agri, NARC, the agri universities to all be put a plan to move forward. So programmed loans kind of thinking has sunk in here. And this is something, when we say that one word for the next 5 years is structural, that has to come from maybe studies like, World Bank did a very good study on Pakistan where, because PIPE studies have been taught, they did a good study in July. They came up with what can be done. That's something to think about. KFW's had a study with Pasha Saab. PIDE has done a study. So there are many things like that. So these are the homegrown brains that we must put together, but not with commissions. I am not a fan of commissions. Amir talked about pension. This is something very close to my heart. Every time I sat in a meeting in the finance division, I said, from 200, it's gone to 250. From 250, it's gone to 300. And now I think it's crossed 500, if I remember the number correctly, per year. And we formed 1, 2, 3, 4. in the last couple of years. You need a set of actuaries to sit there, devise a program, give it to you, and go for implementation. I mean, that's the kind of, we did this program with the IMF. I was very responsible for taking the last program that we did. We had a team, we had a unit, we were tasked to do it, we did the work, we went ahead with it. So, I mean,
Right.
that's the next 5 years of Pakistan should be looking at.
Right.
And one hopes
Absolutely.
that
And Dr. Khagan Sahib, you keep mentioning the next 5 years, and that's important, I understand. But I can't help thinking, of course, that can we even look at it in those terms? Because we have elections in the next 8 months, and perhaps that's the only clarity that we have, or maybe not even that. And considering that sort of a timeline, can we seriously take a look at the economic situation in a matter of years? And Amir Saab, this is of course something that you initially also pointed out, and we have, of course, in our previous discussions with other experts, have also talked about so many shoulds. But at the end of the day, considering where we stand and what sort of factors are contributing towards the current economic situation, how do we even think in those terms when we're not even sure of exactly how the situation is going to proceed and evolve? And if that's not there, then how can we move towards any sort of plan or policy, any strategy that can be looked at in terms of its implementation and in terms of its impact in the coming years?
No, thank you very much. I almost thought I was banned from the program after my last comment, but thank you for bringing me back in. Essentially, you see, let me first say that if you're alluding or trying to push me towards saying that we need a charter of economy or a charter of democracy, I think these are contradicting terms. And let me be very clear. It does not matter if there is political turmoil. It does not matter if we have 20 elections. We've just seen the British government change probably 3 times in 3 months. And, Sunak settled in. And we are going through that. That's what democracies do. Now, here's what the problem of what you're suggesting, if I'm correct, is. And let me posit that because I think Paid has done a lot of work on this, so have a lot of other people. But my stance on this my personal stance, is that politics is all about economic performance and social justice and security. So the party that does better by the tools that it carries in its pockets or has a belt around it, its waist, is the party that wins. Are we going to devoid the voter of that basic democratic right? So please shelve and bury this idea of a charter of economy, because that way you are actually telling the people, the voters, that actually they're voting for nothing but faces, which is what they already do. And finally, when we see a Pakistan that is emerging, that actually has a view because of the youth demographics that are now going to start voting with their feet, I think we should be more worried about finding out what are the tools in our armory. So if I may just please give me 2 minutes to,
Go
since
ahead.
this is a debate, may I just comment on some of the key points that the
Go ahead. Go
earlier
ahead.
speaker. So on the state-owned enterprise and privatization, let's be very straightforward. I have to disagree with my colleague in the studio and simply say that this whole thing about SOEs cost more to privatize and divest than they do to actually keep. Let me posit the following question. So this age of making something sellable, which is not working, let's put it this way. May I ask you a very contrary question? If something becomes sellable, why sell it? Which means it's now profitable. So the government's doing fine. So actually the basic posit here should be right now shut the SOEs. Number 2, actuarial pensions, as Hakan is sending, but do a profile, tell them we pay you when you're home. We're not firing you. Just don't come to work. And that's going to cost us in terms of sunk cost economics much less. Number 3, these enterprises sit on large urban tracts of land and buildings and just sell them. That alone, with the taxation that Hakan has suggested, will net us amazing returns. And the 3 things this will result in: it will plug the bleed from the fiscal side, it will remove the rents and market intervention that these SOEs do, and number 3, it will signal to the world for FDI and internally, nationally to our stock exchange that we are open for business. And then on the PSDP, ADP, quick point, We have a throw forward, Hakan. I'm sorry, I don't keep up with these things a lot these days. I just, get to it when the budget comes around. Is around PSDB plus ADP. We have a throw forward between 10 to 20 years. So that means we have no money to spend on the things we started 10 years ago. How are we then adding to this? So he's absolutely right. Let's not do this. On the central bank's issue, are we doing the right thing? I just want to add one point. I think that we are not structured like the central banks we are trying to ape, and it's a point that IMF has to think about. And because our markets, our economy does not react to the very structured signals that, for example, state bank interest rate tightening, money flow tightening, etc., does in OECD countries. Second last on the agri wealth, let me add one thing. I think that great points, Hakan. I've never seen someone put all these together on TV. So on retail and all this, let me add one more thing. Let's resize the government. We keep every kind of the last government came, they added authority after authority after authority, and then we add all these departments and we keep them off the books, and we want to pay salaries which are market compatible. Let me actually entice your viewers by saying our grade 22 officer today, at the salaries they get, total remuneration that they get at home is actually higher than a UN staff internationally at equivalent level. This has been done. So, they don't need market salaries. They just need to get up and get back to work. Last point on agri-productivity, I think time has come, my esteemed colleagues, that, if we are short of wheat, if we are short of sugar, in addition to productivity raising, it's time to do switching in our eating patterns, because there is nothing like some disaster to bring out the opportunity. Wheat is the most inefficient calorific grain that we produce. Please read up. Most countries have switched from it. Second, on sugar, the health impact of sugar. 60% of sugar is not absorbed by MNCs, it's by our mithai walas. And I think we're, signaling that Pepsi has to. Why is Pepsi selling still with sugar and all this content? Why do we have sugarine drinks? The health burden alone is about 6% of our GDP. The amount of heart attacks we have is almost at par, or if not more, than the obesity disease of America and UK. So please, 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 this is the time to move forward. And thank you very much.
Absolutely. You're, of course, not banned from the show, and I hope that's clear.
Yeah.
Now, Farokh, I'm sure that you had a lot to respond to that, and unfortunately, I know the reason why you smile at the conversation around heart attacks. But go ahead and respond to all of the discussions since we are short on time. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. But I was not thinking of, actually, I was not smiling because of that. Okay. I was smiling because of a couple of other things. But anyway, hey, everybody who was watching, I'm a heart patient, and this is out there. But regardless, what was being said earlier, I seldom disagree with Dr. Hakan. He's like my lodestar. But I am going to actually do it now. And with Durrani Saab as well. Durrani Saab said that nobody has put this list together on air. Actually, it reminded me of another gentleman who did. And do you know when was it? It was in 1993. Moin Qureshi was Pakistan's caretaker prime minister. When he addressed the nation, he mentioned all these things, including agricultural taxation. Unfortunately, the problem with the planners or the visionaries' outlook is that you have to actually go to the grassroots and see the impact. And that was also the second reason why I was smiling when Durrani Saab was also mentioning sugar or consumption pattern. Already in this country, a lot of growth is stunted, and you don't know how nutrition actually, transcends and actually comes down at the grassroots level. So I can sit in Islamabad and I can actually plan for the entire country. Then I can actually ensure that the market economy is market economy and people get what they want. Regarding agricultural tax, other taxes are, of course, for example, he talked about, Dr. Saab actually spoke about a state tax when you get inheritance and you actually have to pay up something. That is a brilliant idea. But the problem is in the short run, you will not collect the kind of taxes you need unless you are going actually in retrospect, and who knows when are you going to start and when you are going to stop. Are you going to start from 1947, and who is going to implement that? Agricultural taxation, the problem is there's a reason why it hasn't happened. The sector is still not digitized, it is not properly processed, and whatever you do, you end up empowering the Patwari and the local authorities who actually already are aggressively exploitative. So you won't be able to get that kind of money in any case from that sector. Real estate, I don't get why we keep on subsidizing real estate. The only thing that you cannot export from this country is real estate. But we have actually given so many tax breaks to real estate that it really, really troubles me. It shouldn't be the case. The only thing I think the reason is that there is some kind of monopoly. Regarding, Charter of Economy, I understand that all political parties have their own programs and they are not going to actually agree on everything. For example, People's Party was opposed to, historically opposed to privatization. And every time steel mills was, or PIA was, or Pakistan Railways or any other part of the economy was, there were plans to actually divest, there was some kind of pushback. But the problem is, if you have heard, Asif Ali Zardari as well, he also talks about offloading the SIC units. Why? Because I think at this moment, the kind of, eating up it is doing, what is cancer, Sana? Cancer is one cell which starts eating nourishment of other cells. And that's how it actually grows. If you don't offload these humongous monsters, then you cannot move ahead. Okay. I understand that you cannot have consensus or Charter of Economy, that's okay. But at least the government should convince itself that it has to deliver on these promises. If it doesn't, and if it doesn't get rid of it, it will have to be confident. There's no political crisis in the country unless you allow yourself to be convinced that there is an economic, political crisis. And that happens because media keeps on playing, sides, and that's why the government inhales a lot of propaganda at this moment. Just convince yourself you are going to stay in power, and you have to deliver on the promises made to IMF, and then go back to IMF because of floods, renegotiate and get a better deal, but get this program done.
All right, and I'm sure all of our panelists have much still left to debate about, but unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you very much to Mr. Amir Zafar Durrani, Mr. Khaqan Najib, and Mr. Mahmood Khalid for joining us and being a part of the debate, and of course Farooq for being a part of this discussion as always. We'll take a look, of course, at more important stories around the corner. Stay tuned to PTV World, and we'll see you tomorrow.